For the ancient Greeks and Romans, death was not a journey up to a distant paradise. They believed the immortal soul stayed firmly attached to the body, living out a second existence directly under the soil. And because the dead were still physically present, they still experienced human needs. They relied entirely on their living descendants to bring them physical offerings, milk, wine, and honey, poured directly into the earth of the tomb. If a family line died out and those offerings stopped, the ancestors did not simply fade away. Deprived of food, they mutated into starving, malevolent spirits that crawled out of their graves to torment the living with disease and barren fields. This meant the father of an ancient household, the paterfamilias, carried a terrifying burden. As the high priest of his own domestic religion, his supreme responsibility was to breed a legitimate male heir, ensuring his ancestors would never starve in the dark. But the theology of the ancient world have very specific rule. The authority to tend the sacred domestic fire and perform the funeral rites could only be transmitted from male to male. The life spark itself was believed to come exclusively from the father. This created a brutal paradox. A father might care deeply for his daughters, but in the eyes of their religion, women were only temporary residents in his house. A daughter could never carry on his sacred fire. Because the family's property was permanently tied to the maintenance of this specific worship, the law followed the theology. A daughter was strictly forbidden from inheriting her father's land or wealth. To save his own soul and protect the generations buried in the yard, a father had to export his daughters to tend the altars of other men and import a woman from outside to bear his own sons. The institution of marriage was engineered as a mechanism for spiritual survival. Moving a woman from one household to another required a complex three-step sacred ritual. The first step was the severing. Standing before his domestic hearth, the father offered a sacrifice. He pronounced a formal declaration, legally and spiritually detaching his daughter from his family line and his ancestral gods forever. In that exact moment, the young bride became completely untethered. As she stepped out of her childhood home, she was a spiritual orphan, belonging to no family, protected by no gods. This leads directly into the second step, the journey. Dressed entirely in white and hidden beneath a veil, the bride was led through the streets toward her new home, surrounded by a procession singing ancient religious hymns. When the procession arrived at the groom's door, a simulated kidnapping took place. The women surrounding the bride would pretend to defend her as the grooms seized her by force. Because she was a total stranger to the gods of this new house, she had no natural right to enter. She had to be violently claimed by the master of the hearth. The groom lifted her in his arms to carry her inside, taking extreme care that her feet never touched the sill. To step on the threshold as an uninitiated outsider would be an insult to the domestic spirits guarding the door. Once inside, the final ritual began. The bride was led to the glowing hearth, where the husband's ancestors were grouped. Here she was purified with lustral water. Then came the climax of the ceremony. The husband and wife offered a sacrifice to the fire and shared a small primitive cake made of wheaten flour. By swallowing that cake in the presence of the domestic gods, the bride was absorbed into a new religion. Legally and spiritually, she experienced a second birth. In the eyes of ancient Roman law, the wife was now formally classified as her husband's daughter. The finality of this transfer was absolute. The wife was entirely cut off from her bloodline. When her own parents died, she was strictly forbidden from offering them funeral rites. They were no longer her ancestors. Because the husband was the one who introduced her to his ancestral gods, he held absolute legal and religious authority over her. She was legally a minor in his household. Yet inside this extreme hierarchy, she commanded immense dignity. She took on the title of Mater Familias, the mother of the family. They were unequal in power, but perfectly equal in religious necessity. Without her at the hearth, his daily sacrifices were considered invalid. The household required both to function. So what was the point of this rigid, high-stakes bond? The ancient texts explicitly state that a man took a wife for one reason: to produce legitimate children, specifically male offspring qualified to learn the prayers and continue the sacred offerings. The ancient family was an ecosystem held together by the terrifying demands of the dead. Marriage was the machine built to bind women to the altars of men, ensuring the ancestors beneath the earth never went hungry.